Hey, glad you're back. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the business side of things. And in each of these, we'll be digging in a little more. What I'm doing is just kind of giving you, the beginnings of this, like the first chapter would be in a book, right? It kind of covers a lot of stuff that's within the whole text. This little meeting here will eventually convert itself and be done and pop up on the screen and annoy us. All right. PC business use. So this revolution, as I've shown you, began with gaming, and it began with the home. That's where it started, is in the house. But there was, predating the PC, business using computers, right? Massive computers. And so it's kind of a back and forth thing where you got these massive machines that are being used for big purposes. Then you got all these small machines being put into homes, and there's this massive need, this massive want and desire for people in homes to use them. I mean, we'll look at it a little bit later, but man, it costs a lot of money to do this kind of thing, right? It was not cheap to buy one of these home computers, but people did it because they could understand that computers was it. And so you got all this moving, right? You got all this stuff that's going forward with home computers. Well, let's get down to what's going on here. And I'll pull up a timeline that'll make a little more sense of this when we get into the Microsoft IBM stuff. So seeing what was going on in the home, IBM, which is International Business Machines, they were the ones known for computers. Like they weren't the only computer company, but they were the biggest. And they kind of looked and said, oh, whoa, I think we missed something here. So in 1981, they introduced the 5150. And it didn't have graphics, it didn't have audio, it just beeped. It was definitely not something people wanted for the home. It did run on a more powerful processor. So this is 5 times the speed of what the Commodore 64, the 6502 that was in most machines, was running at. They started with 1 megahertz and went to 2. So this is substantially faster, even though it's kind of doing less, right? It's not doing audio, it's not doing video, but it has a lot more power. And so these were suited for business. And this machine here, right, that's that 5150, and then little beeps and just little green screens, and that's about it. That's on the PC side of things. With Microsoft, not Microsoft, they're in on it, but we're going to get to that. With IBM realizing we may have missed the mark, we need to get in on this. So let's produce something that's going to compete. But where do we want to compete at? Well, the home market is being flooded, right? The home market's got Apples, and they've got Commodores, and they've got Ataris, and they've got TSR 80s or Radio Shacks were big then. So there's already a lot of competition going in there. But you know where there isn't competition? In business. But Commodore PETs are already being used in business. Apple IIs are already being used in business, and some Ataris. So we have a chance to get in where we are the best. We're the best at business, and we can get in there and we can take over that segment of the market. And that gives us a good little intro. I'm going to pull up another little file here. So hold on just a second. I'll just pause this so you don't have to spend your time watching me click. All right, so before we get to the Microsoft and IBM specific stuff, let's boil the shrinking it down idea. So we talked about how vacuum tubes as big as your hand became transistors that are 40 times smaller, so as big as your hand, but now they're this big. And then integrated circuits can hold up to 1,000 transistors as big as one finger. And so now I'm sure we're past that, statistics on that. And then now we've got microprocessors in 1971, millions of integrated circuits. So millions of these that are thousands of those, right? So that's quite a bit. All right, so shrinking it down does a few things for us, and that's what I want to look at. So the first wave of computers that we have already been looking at, sorry, that's the Zoom meeting that's done for me. Let me get that out of the way, sorry. First wave is one computer for many users. And so again, computers are massively expensive. There's still mainframes available. This is a mainframe. They still use them for certain things. They're very transaction oriented. But anyway, the first wave, you have a massive computer and a lot of users have to use that massive computer. And so what they did was they had to timeshare, right? So you had a dumb terminal. That's what they called it. It's just a TV. I've got one here if you'd like to see it, but it's just a television and it's just a keyboard. And the cables run off, they're grouped together and they run off to where they plug into this machine. And so you'd have hundreds of these, right? Hundreds of these terminals, and you can watch some old movie that shows them, and they're all sitting on what you think is computers, but they're not independent computers. They're terminals. So if you're watching anything from the 70s, that's a terminal that's connected to a mainframe. That's what's happening. So one computer for many users, and that was because they were huge, big, and expensive. Now, the second wave was one computer per user, and that's the PC. So now they're less expensive, they're smaller, but you know what? They're still expensive enough that you're not going to buy a computer for everybody in your house. They're still too expensive. And so it's one computer per user. Now, that doesn't mean that a whole household didn't use a computer, but that meant that the computing power was right there locally, and one person used that at a time. That's what happened. A user was on it, just like I'm on this notebook. Second wave of computers. I'm using the notebook, nobody else is. And now we're in the third wave. Many computers per user. So I have a smartphone, I have a watch, I do not have computers on my body, but lots of people do. It's in their clothing. Lots of athletes do that. I have a tablet. I have this computer sitting in front of me. I have the work computer right over here. I've got another one behind me, right? Many computers for one user. And it enables me to do a ton of stuff all at the same time. So then what is next? Well, let me skip the ubiquitous portion of this. That's for my 103 class. The fourth wave, everything has a computer in it. Quantum computing. So computers get so small that it's just at a quantum level, and quantum computing is happening now. You can go to IBM's site and you can rent time on their quantum computer. And they're not the only ones, but they've been working on it for a long time. And so they have working quantum computers that use a molecule to do the computations instead of that microprocessor. So how far will that go? I cannot tell you. A lot of it depends on the physical nature of this and whether or not we can get a quantum computer running at room temperature, because right now it has to be many degrees below room temperature, but they've come a long way because it used to have to run at absolute zero. So even if it doesn't hit into everything, like I'm supposing here, even if it doesn't get to that point, quantum computing aligned with AI will be a big thing. It'll be a massive, massive thing, because that's a massive amount of computing power for something that needs a massive amount of computing power, which is AI. Now, let me jump down in my little presentation here. All right, what I have got pulled up here is a little bit from the Computer History Museum. There's actually another site I like much better, but it is defunct. It's not there. And actually, the other site looks really, really crappy, but it's a lot more condensed. You get to see things a lot more condensed. And I don't always agree with what the Computer History Museum is showing. But I want to show you 1965, right? Here's your refrigerator. That's your computer that you're dealing with. And at least from looking at the computer relationship, you could see, wow, okay, they're starting to shrink. Right? These are 61 and so on. Nice, huge computers. Sabre comes online. You can look that up. But this isn't just PC, right? The one I looked at before is like a personal computer history instead of just a computer history. And so there's a Hewlett-Packard calculator. This is 1973. IBM SCAMP is developed. So you can see they have an idea of what's going on, right? These machines need to be smaller and so on. But the problem with a lot of what IBM did was that this was massively expensive. So this would have cost $15,000, $20,000 for something like that. That's way too much money, right? Way too much money. So we come down and there's Xerox and on 74. There's the Sabi. I don't know what that is, but you can see it's just a bunch of boards you put in there with some switches on the front. Not very friendly, but definitely. And see, here's an Altair 8800. And lots of people will actually, geez, this was not going to highlight things for me, right? Lots of people will say this actually is the first PC. A lot of people will say that. And there's definitely an argument for it to be that way. It's very much like the MITs. But basically, what happened is it's kind of like saying who discovered America, right? And people argue over that because there's proof that the Vikings go way back and that there's actually even other evidences from other countries that go even further back. And so it's like, who discovered it? Well, we say that Christopher Columbus discovered it because something happened. That is when people started to flood into the American continent. And the same holds true here. The Altair 8800 was basically just programmable from the front of this. This is the machine that you see in front of you. It is all that there is. There is not, let's plug in a monitor to it or a printer to it. You would flip switches on the front to program it. And then you would say, okay, and there's these switches down here. Let me see if this actually zooms in good enough. That would actually store it. Now that just takes us back. So you'd flip these switches, and then there's a store switch someplace, and you'd store that. And then you would flip the switches again, and you would store that, and you would go through until finally the whole program is entered. And then you would say, what's the result? And it would tell you in lights. Wow. But it was cheap enough for people to buy. Still, what you would think is too expensive, right? It's $297, and go look up a calculator online. You know, a decade calculator that says what is $297 in today's money, and you'd say, I'm not buying that, right? But these were, again, the people that are doing this can see the vision, and they want their own computer. And prior to this, the computers were massive, and not 297, but 20,000 in that kind of money, right, back then. And so when we go back several years, then you start dealing with massively expensive computers. And so this was very, very cheap considering what they had before. I really don't like this site. It takes too long to get anywhere on it. So again, why is this important? Why is the Altair 8800 important? Because Bill Gates and Paul Allen licensed basic programming for the MITs and Altair, right? So they licensed that so that you could actually program in BASIC. Now, basic programming, actually, we'll just look it up. Let's just BASIC. They did not invent that. That's Codecademy. I should have probably put history. So I can show you how far back this goes. Programming was really, really, really hard for people to do. And so BASIC was developed so that people could be able to use it better, if I can find it. So first version of BASIC was released in May. Let's get rid of their advertisements. 1964. All right. BASIC was designed to basically allow an average individual to have an easy time of making the computer do what they want it to do. So that's something that people really don't think about. They don't think about the fact that you're going back far enough in time that you're not loading on applications. You're not buying software and putting it on your computer. You're not downloading software and putting it on your computer. You program what you want it to do. And so what happens is Paul Allen basically sees BASIC. I got to stop using BASIC, right? Sees this advertisement and is like, holy cow, it has begun. So kind of the little dream that I'm sure that Bill Gates and Paul Allen thought about a lot, of how computers would be much, much bigger, much more accepted than what they are. that they would become smaller and more powerful. And they're thinking like this as a teenager, using a system that they have to basically dial into to get into the city mainframe and do something. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail. But they see that happening and they're like, this is the time. And so what Bill Gates does is creates BASIC for the Altair 8800. And that's the beginning of Microsoft. That's how that starts. It's interesting to see from this timeline, there's the Xerox PARC computer, which is the Alto. And we'll talk about that when we get to graphical systems. But it is not a PC. And like I said, that's what I don't like about the site. That's the computer down here. It's massive. So it's not a PC. There's the 6502 that was introduced September 1975. Chuck Peddle actually sold them in San Francisco at the cost of $25. The Motorola, I think, was 160, I think is what it was. And so anybody that wanted to build a computer, and there's tons of these people that want to build a computer, are out there going, sweet, I'm going to build my own computer. And what I need is a processor to sit in the middle of that. And so becomes massively, massively popular all over the place. So here's just some of them. There's a 6800. You can see that kind of looks like an Altair, but you're not programming it with switches. The Intel 8080 and the Zlog 80 come out. The Zlog 80 was used in a lot of systems. Let's skip the big stuff. Come down into, there's the Apple II that was introduced. I actually worked on a VAX here at the college. It was a mini computer. And then there's the Radio Shack TSR 80. So in 1978, I believe that is. So 77, and then this is 78. And then in 79, the Atari was released. And then the Commodore PET, and that's part of what I don't agree with them on, because they always put it much further down the list when in reality, right, by this time, right, I'm really young, but these computers start to appear places, and it's influential to me to see them. And of course, I saw way more of these computers than I saw of anything else, because they were the cheapest ones out there. And these guys are in California, and they tend to love their Apple. And so they always kind of put Apple way up here, like, oh, this Apple IIc was introduced, and make it look like, wait, it sold between 77. So this one started in 77 as well. There's the PET in 1977. So why isn't that one first, right? It's running on the 6502 from the people who made it, but no, they don't want to do that. But at the same time, there's a lot more powerful processors that are being made. The Motorola 6800 is really, really powerful. And actually, Chuck Peddle leaves these people, Motorola, to come over and make something that can be sold to everybody, instead of something that's so expensive it'll only be in these big machines. 20 and 80, TI, Texas Instruments, Sinclair. And so I'm just kind of showing you the little timeline of the personal systems that were released. The Franklin Ace. There's the IBM PC that was introduced. So when you realize, well, how long were these things running before? Well, those PETs, right, they were around 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82. So by the time IBM really has an answer, it's been about 5 years of time, which has given the others a great lead. Of course, 82 is when IBM really releases something that's worth something. So in 1980, they kind of released something, and it was awesome, but too expensive. And you just keep going on here. Anyway, I'm going to stop this video. I just wanted to show you a little bit about the computers that were going on the time, and the fact that what happened is all of these systems are running out there, and some of them are meant for business, and most of them are meant for home. And so when IBM really takes a look at what's going on, they're going to, of course, highlight their business, and I will speak about Microsoft and them together. So that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching.